We can get started. We good? Okay, so today, Young Americans for Freedom kicks off our annual Freedom Week. We'll have 3 events this week. This is the first, which is Jorge Galacia has come to speak to us about socialism as it applies to the situation in Venezuela and how his past could become our future. We will also have a Berlin Wall event on Wednesday commemorating the fall of the Berlin Wall. And on Thursday night, we will have veteran speakers. So tonight, Mr. Galacia has come, and he will be speaking to us about his time living in Venezuela and his reasons for leaving the country. Mainly socialism. Before socialism devastated Venezuela, he lived a life much like most of us. Venezuela was like a middle-income economy, much like the United States. Now 4 million Venezuelans have fled a collapsing nation because of the socialist government's mismanagement and just their failure to maintain the infrastructure and society that Venezuela once had. Living under this government showed Jorge the dangers of the state growing to a large size. He's been fighting against the dangers of socialism since a very young age.
You gave my talk already, man.
And he continues the fight today. So, welcome to Michigan Tech.
Thank you, my
I
friend.
appreciate you coming.
He probably knows more than me about Venezuela. You know?
It is really hard for people to believe that a country with so much potential could collapse so completely.
Breaking news in our world, Venezuela may be on the brink of no return right now.
This is what it's come to in Venezuela. Emergency surgery by flashlight.
A massive shortage of food and aid in the country is leaving thousands of Venezuelans literally fighting for their lives.
Venezuela was once one of the richest countries in the world.
Venezuela's government today ordered schools and businesses closed. Tomorrow's a nationwide power failure continues. Food and gasoline in Venezuela are running out.
People say that what happened in Venezuela could never happen here in America. But I was there. I am an eyewitness. And I want to tell you, think again.
Hundreds of Venezuelans are fleeing the country.
I was forced to leave my life, my family, and my country behind. Now, I want to tell the story.
In the year 2017, I was texting with one of my best friends after arriving from a peaceful demonstration against the Maduro regime. Suddenly he said to me, "Hey man, there is a group of police officers standing right in my front door. What should I do now?" I read this text message and I said to him, "Well, do not open the door, go hiding, and remain quiet." But after this, I never received a single text message back from him, just a terrifying silence. My name is Jorge Galacia. I am a 26 years old Venezuelan political activist, and also I am an asylum seeker here in the US. And I was supposed to show you a couple of videos of my homeland, but I don't think they're going to work for some reason. Yeah. And one of these videos was from the year 1970, the other one is from a year ago. And the first video I want you to imagine, well, a prosperous nation, a vibrant economy, cars everywhere in the road, new cars. And the second video you saw, well, a lot of poverty all over the place, people basically starving, no electricity, no water supply, political repression and persecution. So my question to you here is, how did we go from that very first image that I described to you to the second one where, well, young people just like me and many of you are being incarcerated by political police because of our political ideas? How did that happen? Well, today my mission is to try to give an answer to that question, but first of all, I'd like to share with you a little bit of my own personal experience of how it is to live under the Venezuelan dictatorship. I grew up in a middle-class family, Certainly, we were never rich, but I am convinced that in the past we used to have a pretty happy life, a good one. My family and I used to go to restaurants like the ones you are seeing on the screen. I used to have the latest versions of my favorite video games, great birthday parties every year when I was a child. It was a pretty good life. But then, and thanks to the collapse of the system, this situation changed almost completely. To the point where, for example, in my house, we don't even have constant water supply anymore. So me and my mom needed to drive to a certain place in Caracas, fill up some big water containers, and bring those back home in order to do the regular activities that need to be done at home. Electricity was constantly failing. 3 years ago, actually, we had a massive blackout in the entire nation. It lasted for several days, weeks even. It was extremely terrifying for me because I was already here living in the United States, and it was impossible for me to communicate with anybody inside of Venezuela. It was like if the whole country was dead for a lot of days. I didn't have a clue about how well or bad my mom was doing, my grandma, anybody. It was really scary. And even food is really hard to come by. Only 4 years ago, when I was still living in Venezuela, one of my main desires in life was to be able to taste again a piece of pizza or hamburger, because unfortunately all of those things became luxury to me. Here are a couple of pictures of myself. I don't know if you can notice any difference, but the one that says socialism is from the year 2019, when I was still in Venezuela. The other one is from last year. You can see that I gained a little bit of weight. I'm not doing that bad, I think, but the reason I was like that in 2018 is because I wasn't eating as much as I wanted to eat, unfortunately. I was never starving, of course, but I think you get the point. I remember this year we didn't even have like meat in my house. We substituted it with grains and greasy stuff. I stopped eating chicken. It was horrible. It was really unaffordable for my house. There was nothing to be found in the marketplace. A really dark period of time in my life. But do not believe that this whole situation that I'm describing to you is somehow an isolated case, that this only happened to me and my family and that was it. No. Because actually, if you compare my own situation with the rest of the Venezuelan population, you might still believe that me and my family are still somehow privileged among society. And let me give you an example so you can understand why I'm saying this. My grandma, she suffers from high blood pressure problems, and she needs to take a medication on a daily basis in order to control her condition. And thanks God, and despite all of the difficulties that we're seeing in Venezuela, we have been able to provide the pills for her. But for majority of Venezuelans, well, this is not the case at all. We're seeing how thousands of Venezuelans are dying on a daily basis just because they cannot find or they cannot afford whatever medicine they might need. Diabetic people dying because they cannot find any insulin, or again, they cannot afford it. It's a really horrible situation. And let's not even talk about worse diseases like cancer, for example, because this is how Venezuelan hospitals look nowadays. And of course, you cannot expect to receive any kind of treatment in a place like this. And this is only one example that I could show to you today to demonstrate how devastated the nation is. If you read the news about my country, you're going to realize, headline after headline, how horrible the economic and political crisis is. And because of all of this devastation, we have already seen how more than 7 million people have already left the country. I know that it says 4, but this number is outdated. According to the United Nations, we are already over 7 million people who have left. And of course, we are going to places like Colombia, like Ecuador, like Peru. Currently, a lot of people are taking a really dangerous path through Central America. They are going through Colombia and Panama and Costa Rica. There is a really risky and dangerous jungle named the Darien jungle, and it is full of human traffickers, horrible animals, horrible weather conditions, and a lot of people are dying because they are taking their chances to try to reach the U.S. southern border because of the desperation of the crisis that we're seeing in Venezuela. And but of course they rather taking their chances than staying at Maduro's Venezuela. Of course, a lot of people, as I said, they are basically just walking through the entire continent because majority of us don't have enough money to afford an air ticket and not even a bus ticket. But the danger for me that it didn't stop there. As I mentioned before, I was a political activist when I was in Venezuela. In the year 2014, I joined the student movement of my university, and I also joined a political party named Vente Venezuela, which in Spanish stands for Come Venezuela. This is a classical liberal political party advocating for freedom of speech, freedom of religion, economic freedom. All of these great values that makes it possible to live in a free and prosperous society. But in Venezuela, in order to do this kind of activism, you have to be a risk taker, and a big one. Because the political police is always out there trying to locate opposition leaders that are trying to do something against the Maduro regime. And please keep in mind that I'm not talking about violent people like military leaders or rioters. I'm talking about peaceful people like YouTubers, people on Twitter, on Instagram, songwriters, singers. People who are just trying to advocate for whatever they believe in are putting their life at risk. For example, this lady right here, her name is Inés González Arraga, and she was sent to prison just because she wrote down a couple of tweets against the dictatorship. They didn't like what she wrote. They sent her to prison. That guy right here, he's an American citizen named Joshua Holt. He was doing a missionary trip to Venezuela to help the poor, and because of this, he was accused of being an American spy in Venezuelan soil, and he was sent to prison. And not even judges are free from the repressive hand of the regime. That lady right there, her name is Maria Lourdes Afiuni, and she's a judge who dared to write a sentence. She took a decision against the dictatorship, and they accused her of being a traitor, and they sent her to prison. So as you can see, we don't have a lot of divisions between powers anymore in Venezuela. And this is exactly what happened to me and my friend. In the year 2017, he and I were so deeply involved in the massive demonstrations that were going on against Maduro in that year. Well, because of that, my friend was targeted by Maduro's political police, and after these events that I talked to you about at the beginning of the conversation, his mom reached out to me and she confirmed to me the worst, that he was taken. The police broke into his house in the middle of the night without a warrant, without any kind of legality or due process, and they took him away. And at the moment I found out that this was happening to me, and to him, I panicked because I knew for a fact that the next in line, in order to be captured, was me. Because he and I were part of the same political team, we were doing exactly the same kind of activism at the same time and location, so if they knew about his position, they probably knew about mine as well. So I needed to disappear really quickly, and I was sent into a religious place in Venezuela. Of course, I am not allowed to reveal to you a lot of information about this place, not the name, nor the location, and not even the religion that they follow in this place, because I don't want to take any kind of chance of compromising the safety of these people in Venezuela. But I was sent there, and I was in total isolation, meaning that I needed to shut down all of my social media accounts. I needed to turn off completely my cell phone. I wasn't able to communicate with anybody outside this place, not even with my mom nor my dad, anybody. And well, this was a life-changing experience for me, because one day I wasn't a student, probably like many of you here today. I was worrying about my next day exams and things like that. And all of a sudden I saw myself involved in all of this police persecution as if I were some sort of criminal. And of course, I was not. And during my time hiding, well, I was extremely stressed. First of all, because of my friend, because, well, despite the fact that I wasn't having the best time in my life, I was isolated, I was outside my house. I knew for a fact that he was taking the worst of the situation, because he was actually in prison. And, well, you know, while he was in prison, he was being beaten on a daily basis. He was forced to eat food in really bad shape. He was forced to share a cell room with the worst of the Venezuelan population, meaning rapists, murderers, kidnappers, people that you don't really want to be friends with. And while he was going through all of that, I was unable to provide any kind of help for him or his family to get him out of that place, because I was also hiding. And I was feeling guilty as well, because I thought, well, if he and I were part of the same team, maybe the third consequence should be that he and I should be facing the very same consequences. I didn't like the fact that I was holding a better position than the one he was holding, right? So, well, it was extremely stressful at that time. But But I was also really worried about myself because I didn't know for how long this hiding situation was going to be in place for me. I was constantly thinking things like, will I ever be able to see my mom again? Will I ever need to escape through the border hiding under a truck? Will I ever be able to finish my law degree? Those thoughts were surrounding my head every single night before going to sleep. It was, again, an extremely stressful and life-changing situation. But, well, thanks God, my friend was indeed released from prison 3 months after these events. This also allowed me to resume little by little my ordinary life in Venezuela, but honestly, I never got to be the same after this experience. I was, constantly expecting the police to show up in the middle of the night, just the way it happened to him 3 months earlier. And because of all of this situation, I just decided to stay away for a while from all of the political activism. Not because I stopped believing what I believe right now, but because I didn't want to compromise the safety of my family, especially my mom. My mom, she's extremely overprotective. She called me like 7 times during my ride here. Imagine for someone like her to not be able to know about me for almost 3 months. She didn't have a clue about where I was, if I was eating properly, if I was okay. And she almost lost her mind during this period of time, and I didn't want her to go through the same all over again. So as I said, I decided to stay away from all of the activism. And thanks to that decision, I was able to finish my law degree in Venezuela in the year 2018. And once I did that, I applied to participate in this great leadership program named Project Arizona, which is being held at Arizona State University. I was selected to be part of that, and thanks God, well, that's the reason I was able to come here from Venezuela in the first place, right? And I was supposed to go back to Venezuela on May 1st, 2019, but I don't know how many of you remember, but during that time, when I was doing this program, this was also happening in Venezuela. The appearance of Juan Guaidó and his assumption as the legitimate leader or president of Venezuela. He was being recognized by several nations, following the lead, of course, of the United States. And thanks to these events, Venezuela went into the top of the news. Everybody was talking about Venezuela, a bit similar to what we're seeing right now maybe with Ukraine. The topic became extremely popular during 2019. And thanks to this, I started to receive a lot of attention in Phoenix. A lot of people started to invite me to give talks about, well, like this today, student groups at ASU, local media in Phoenix, Arizona, or political groups in Phoenix. People who wanted to know more about what was going on in Venezuela, and I became a source of information for many people here. And well, thanks to that, I just decided to claim asylum because I basically resumed my activism while I was here. And I know for a fact that if I return to Venezuela under these very same circumstances, I'm gonna end up in prison, and I don't feel like going to prison, of course. But anyway, how did it all start? Did it all begin in 1999 when we first elected Hugo Chavez as our president? Or maybe we actually have to look even further into the past to understand the causes that led Venezuela into all of these political and economic crises. Because while I was doing this program at ASU, I used to engage a lot in conversation with progressives in the room, and I used to say to them things like, hey, I know for a fact that all of you have the best intentions for your country. You want the best possible outcome, but I am convinced that your political ideas might create the very same environment that led Venezuela into all of these economic chaos, right? And every time I said this to them, they used to reply by saying something like, no man, you don't really know what you're talking about. The progressive movement in America is not advocating for the very same policies followed by Maduro and by Chavez in Venezuela. And the very first time I heard this argument, I stopped for a while and I thought to myself, well, you know what? These people may actually have a point. Because if we're going to be honest about these topics, we have to admit things like, for example, Hugo Chavez came from the military, that he confiscated thousands of private businesses inside of Venezuela, that he incarcerated many of his political opponents, that he even murdered many of his political opponents, that he conformed this paramilitary group named Colectivos, which is basically a group of civilians carrying long weapons to terrorize society to avoid any kind of political opposition. So, in that sense, I do believe that Chavez and Maduro might not be necessarily the same to the progressive movement as a whole here in the US. But let me ask you once again, how did we reach this point? What did we have even before Hugo Chavez and Maduro? Did we have an open economy with a balanced budget, or maybe we had something much more similar to the kind of welfare state that progressives are advocating for here in the US? And well, in order to answer this question, let's locate this talk for a while during the decade of the 70s. During this decade, well, Venezuela was doing extraordinarily well economically. We used to have the biggest economy in the entire Latin American region. We used to have a greater GDP than countries like Spain, like Israel, like China. At some point, Venezuela was even the fourth biggest economy in the entire world. So as I said, Venezuela was doing pretty well. But then, in the year 1975, under the leadership of that guy over there, his name is Carlos Andrés Pérez, two things happened that completely reshape our history until today. The first of those things that happened was, of course, the nationalization of our oil industry. I don't know how many of you know, but Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the entire world. And during this time, Venezuela used to be one of the main oil producers of the world. And the second thing that happened was that we saw a huge boom among the oil prices in the global market. So because of the combinations of these two factors, well, the government was able to start spending a lot of more money because, well, they started to receive a lot of new resources that they were not to receive in the past. And his administration, again, decided to tackle the problem of inequality and to eliminate poverty by creating a bunch of new social programs and subsidies. For example, one of the things that they did during this time, free college for everybody. The government created this social program designed to grant scholarships to any Venezuelan who wanted to pursue the studies at the university level. The only requirement to receive one of these was to, again, receive an admission letter from any major university, even across the world. Because of this, we saw thousands of Venezuelans going to study to the very best universities of the world for free. None of them was required to pay back to the state a single penny. And it didn't even matter whether they graduated or not. Free healthcare for everybody. The government created more than 20 public hospitals where any Venezuelan could go regardless of their socioeconomic conditions. You could be poor, you could be rich, it didn't matter. All you needed to do was to attend to one of these facilities, and there you would have received free medical attention. And even the gasoline was being subsidized during this time. Venezuela has always been famous for having the cheapest gasoline rates among the entire world, but this was never because of free market and competition, but because of this huge governmental subsidy. But then, well, what happened next? In the year 1979, this huge boom that we saw among the oil prices basically came to an end. And because of this, three major consequences happened that, as I said, completely reshape our history. The first of those consequences was the appearance of major levels of inflation. And why did this happen? Well, because politicians during this time were so committed to the idea of not making any single cut to the existing social programs and subsidies. And even beyond that, many of them were elected under the promise of keep expanding even more all of the social programs and subsidies. And of course, without a huge oil revenue, the only way to do this was through printing new money out of nowhere, raising taxes, borrowing more money out of the international market. So thanks to all of this decision making, Venezuela started to experience for the very first time major levels of inflation. And what inflation does is, like, for example, if you go to a restaurant, let's say, to get a hamburger, it would cost you, I don't know, let's say 4 bolívares. But if you go to the very same restaurant, let's say a week later, you're going to find the very same hamburger for, let's say, 8 bolívares. And while this is happening, well, your salary is basically remaining on the very same position. So Venezuelans were becoming poorer and poorer with the pass of the time. And the drama of this is that, well, this is not only happening with burgers, this is happening with housing, this is happening with medicine, this is happening with almost every single product and service provided by the economy. The second consequence that we saw was the appearance of something that I call a culture of dependency. In the year 1989, Venezuelans decided to re-elect this guy, Carlos Andrés Pérez, for a second presidential term. Why did they do this? Well, because the collective mentality behind his re-election was something like, well, people were thinking if he was the mastermind behind all of these great social programs and subsidies, and if the economy was actually working really well under his first administration, maybe if we bring him back again to power, he's going to realize a way to find a way to bring back all of those years of prosperity that we were used to. Well, as I said, he won the re-election, but surprisingly enough, he and his team arrived with new ideas to power. They realized that the levels of spending were no longer sustainable. So he and his team decided to pursue some reforms that were actually pointing in the right direction. He tried to reduce many of the social programs he created during his first administration. He tried also to reduce many of the subsidies he created during his first administration. But, well, guess what? It was already too late. Venezuelans were already used to the idea of living out of government assistance. And the very next day, after he announced the reforms, this happened, the Caracazo revolt. Thousands of Venezuelans went out to the streets like crazy to riot against the government, to loot private businesses, to produce all sort of chaos, because they were, of course, rejecting all of these reforms. Sadly, this is one of the most violent episodes in our modern history, because even the police was participating with the looters. So the government was forced to send out military forces to bring back control, and because of the clashes between the military forces and the population, we saw how hundreds of Venezuelans lost their life during this tragic event. And the third consequence that we saw was the appearance of Hugo Chavez himself. In the year 1992, he tried to overtake the government by the use of force. As I said, he came from the military. And of course, he failed, but his attempt gave him a lot of popularity among Venezuelans, because he was rooting for those very same ideas that were already popular. He was telling people things like, hey, all of you, you know what, all of you are entitled to receive all of these social programs and subsidies, and if you're seeing that they are being cut from the budget, it is only because of the corruption of the political sector and because of the greed of the capitalistic sector. And as I said, a lot of people believe in this message. Unfortunately, again, another administration gave him something like a presidential pardon, which even saved him from going to court. He never faced a single trial for the crimes that he did in 1992. As I said, he tried to overtake, by the use of force, a democratically elected government. A lot of people died during these events, and he never paid a single consequence for doing this. And because of this pardon, he was allowed to participate in the 1998 elections, which of course he won. And then, as a president, he managed to, as I said, to incarcerate many of his political opponents. He confiscated thousands of private businesses inside of Venezuela. He murdered many of his political opponents. He changed the name of the country. He rewrote completely the constitution. He changed the flag. And now, after more than 22 years, we have not been able to remove that system that he created and that now endures under the leadership of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. So, it worries me a lot to see how the levels of spending in this country keeps going up and up. I am convinced that if we don't find a way to put a break to all of this massive spending, we're going to see ourselves in a really bad economic situation. Keep in mind that this is happening, it doesn't really even matter whether Republicans or Democrats are controlling the presidency and Congress. We see how this institution keeps flipping between political parties, but the deficit keeps going up, the public spending keeps going up, the debt keeps going up, and I am convinced that if we don't find a way to put a break into all of this massive spending, well, we're going to be in big trouble. Will we end up like Venezuela? Well, maybe, or maybe not. But we could end up like places like Argentina, like Greece. History is full of examples of societies that collapse because they were unable to control their levels of spending on time. So, sure, I would never say to you that the progressive movement here in America is necessarily the same to Chavez and Maduro, but if their political ideas ever get to be implemented, they might create the very same environment that led Venezuela into the appearance of people like Hugo Chavez and Maduro. So, if I were you, I would definitely recommend, I would definitely avoid voting for politicians that offer me free college tuition or free housing or free whatever, because as you just saw, we used to have all of these even before Hugo Chavez and Maduro, but it was never free for us. It costed us billions of dollars and ultimately our own freedom and democracy. And I would also add that, especially to conservatives in the room, I don't know how many of you are, but I think we need to keep adding pressure to our conservative leader to keep talking about fiscal responsibility, to keep pushing for a more, to balance the budget, to bring back common sense to our finances. Because if we as conservatives don't do that, let me guarantee you that nobody else is going to do that. And well, again, it's not a good path to follow. So thank you all. God bless you. Thanks for inviting me. Feel free to follow me on social media if you like. And now we can have some questions or some debates.
I don't have microphone. Must be over there, huh?
Thank you, everybody. We'd like to open up for questions now. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand and I will come to you.
Alright, do you mind if I just hold this? Alright, that'd be a little easier. Alright, I didn't really have a great time to form this in my head, but I remember looking at the, you had the graph of the debt increasing constantly. Well, the question I was thinking is like, more along the lines of which things do you cut, right? Because the issue is like, you know, like before like 2019, before they started printing all the money, like you were bringing in about $3 trillion a year into the country via like the IRS, but then they would need about $4 trillion to pay for all the federal programs. And so naturally, like each year, they're basically adding $1 trillion to the debt. It seems to me that the two main programs, if you look at the federal budget, besides the military, which is over-bloated, but it's not nearly as bad as Medicare and Social Security. And it seems to me that Social Security will fail by 2036, and I'm not so sure about Medicare, but it also seems rather also over-bloated as well. And those are the two main things that you would actually need to cut. So I guess my question is, considering like, you have this graph of the debt going up, but the issue is that most of it's in U.S. bonds, right? So at the end of the day, like, the government just can't confiscate private citizens' wealth. At the end of the day, like, you might just not pay it back to ourselves, and then trillions of dollars would go poof. So I guess my question is, what do you think the consequences of not paying back the debt would be? And on top of that, what's a valid alternative to like Social Security? Like the Australians have a mandatory savings policy that a certain amount of your income has to be saved in whatever index funds or whatever it is. Because Social Security just doesn't save anything; it just reallocates to other people. It's a 14% tax on everyone's salaries. So.
Yeah, I do. That's the kind of debate we should be having right now as a society: where to make cuts, where to make to open some room to save a little bit of money, from them, and to try to make the budget better, right? But unfortunately, I don't see anybody talking about these issues in America anymore, right? What people are talking about is how to expand the budget even more, which makes no sense to me, right? Of course, I don't think I can give you like a clear answer of, yeah, cut this, cut that. I don't think that's my role here today. I agree with you. Social Security, Medicaid, all of those programs first seems to be really ineffective, and they take a lot of money. So that's probably where I would start looking at where to create some reforms, right? But again, I think that's the kind of debate we should be discussing right now, and in Congress, for example, right? But nobody's really talking about this anymore. And of course, when you say like let's not pay the debt, but what our main lender, country that lends us is China, I think that would create a really risky situation. They are our most equal rival that we're currently facing right now. It's not Russia, it's China. So I think that's also really responsible for to keep them to give them that sort of power. But yeah, that's what I would say.
How long was Chavez in power before things started to go sideways? Was it like immediately after he was elected, or did it take a while before his programs really started to erode Venezuela's democracy and society?
Yeah, it definitely took a while. It wasn't something, as I said, this was not a thing as one day to another thing. Actually, when Hugo Chavez assumed power, he was extremely lucky because like a year after he assumed, we were hit by another boom among the oil prices. The oil prices reached like all-time highs, and he was able to start spending like crazy again. He started to give away a bunch of free stuff to almost everybody. Every single sector of the society was receiving something. The poor were receiving, I don't know, washing machines or different stuff. The middle class he even subsidized like trips. The middle class started to travel to Disneyland 3 and 4 times at the same year because it was extremely affordable because all of these subsidies that Chavez created. Of course, even the richest sector of the society started to see a lot of benefits of the very first years of his administration. But then, of course, when the oil prices came down and when he started to basically nationalize all of these industries, that's when the problems became extremely evident. He made us so dependent on oil revenues, and of course when oil prices hit down and there were almost no businesses inside of Venezuela because all of those were confiscated and were no longer operational, well, that's when our problems started. So I would say it was extremely evident that the things were going wrong, at least in the case of my family in the year 2014. That's when my life, at least, and my family's life changed dramatically, completely. Like we experienced things that we never thought that we were ever going to experience. Like, as I said, I was a middle class member of the society, and all of a sudden, well, not even clean water in my house anymore, not even food. I remember there is this anecdote. This was like in the beginning of the crisis. My mom and I saw like a homeless person searching through our garbage for some food, and we felt like sad for him, and we gave him some food. And he said to us something extremely smart. He said, "No, guys, don't worry about me because I've been homeless my whole life, and I am used to to go and search in the trash can for whatever left over. But we are all going to be in the same situation in a while, and you guys are not going. You have not been in my situation. You're not going to be able ever to do what I'm doing right now to survive." And I heard those words, and I was like, "Man, that's true. I would never search through the garbage to eat something." It was really smart. So the year 2014, at least, the crisis became evident.
When you talk about the government potentially confiscating private wealth, that is what they in fact did when they nationalized the petroleum industry. I know we lost some money in investments when that happened. I know some people that
when?
I can't recall the year,
okay.
but there were companies, so when they nationalized those companies, they are confiscating private wealth. People are losing their investments and their futures. So make no mistake about that.
Yeah, that definitely was pretty tragic. I would say in 1975 was the first major nationalization although I didn't agree, but, well, I wasn't even born, but I don't agree with the fact that they did that, but it was organized. It wasn't like they took it away. They actually reached an agreement with the oil companies. They were all American companies, and the Venezuelan government paid a fair price for those companies. It wasn't like, however, when Hugo Chavez took place, there was still some private participation in our oil industry. It wasn't that big, but he managed to, as you said, he basically took things without even paying a fair compensation for those assets. And yeah, of course, a lot of people lost a lot of things. For example, my neighbor, he wasn't an oil executive or something, but he had like a small portion of land that he fought for. I don't know, I would say like 20 years. There was a judiciary fight going on with some people that were located in this piece of land. He managed to win this judicial fight after more than 20 years. He was extremely happy. He invested a lot of money to open a car washing, I don't know, store, whatever. And like a year after he opened, Hugo Chavez decided to just confiscate his thing again, and he died out of a heart attack just the way when they informed that happened. And yeah, I mean, you cannot imagine all the drama of landowners and property owners that we have gone through. You know, it's sad.
I have an anecdote, kind of like Lynn has. We used to be in the welding industry, and we used to sell cobalt welding wire to the tool and die industry, primarily for repairing welding tooling, drill bits, drill heads, and stuff like that for the oil industry. And I recall back in...
Can you repeat?
What's that?
Can you repeat?
In the oil industry, the drill heads, we used to sell welding alloys made out of cobalt, which was very volatile metals market. And I just recall the conversations going on. We were looking at selling the PDVSA. Ultimately, we decided not to because we didn't know if we'd get paid or not. And that would have been in the late 80s, probably early 90s.
Wow.
So it does have an effect.
Yeah, of course. And Chavez wasn't even in the picture during that time. So a lot of people say, and I believe that's true, that Hugo Chavez and Maduro are just kind of the same system we used to have during the 80s and 90s, but you know, exponential, I don't know, amplified, you know. It's like all of the corruption became bigger, all of the steps into socialism became more evident and bigger, so.
Thank you for coming here and giving this presentation. I'm personally from Poland, so I went through similar situations many times. But anyway, what struck me in your presentation when you were talking about free college. Yeah, so what happened to all these educated people? Because like you have a pretty good example in Iran right now that all these young people are rising and trying to demonstrate against government. Do you have the same situation in Venezuela?
Can you repeat the last part? Like,
yeah, it's just like what happened to these educated people because they had free college, so probably some significant fraction of society got educated, and what happened to them?
Well, majority of them, if they receive like technical education, like in the oil industry or stuff like that, many of them just left Venezuela. They're working and doing really well outside of Venezuela. So basically, Venezuela invested a lot of money, and these people didn't even, you know, produce a lot for our own economy because they just left, especially when Hugo Chavez took power. But also there was, you know, majority of people who were graduating from these universities became socialists because. Well, unfortunately, in campuses in Venezuela, you know, majority of professors were teaching socialism. They were telling people to admire Fidel Castro and stuff like that. Our educated elite became really leftist. But, yeah. But well, I can tell you now, even despite all of the difficulties, we still have some private universities operating in Venezuela. I'm from one of them, and well, from these places is where we have had like major opposition leaders coming out that are not a major opposition leader, I'm an opposition guy, but we have managed to do some movements against the dictatorship. The opposition, the student movement in Venezuela used to be particularly strong. Not anymore, I would say, but yeah, that's the situation with students.
I was just wondering, do they still have any of the social programs today, or have they all dissolved because they can't afford them?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question and relevant. I would say that right now is the best time we have ever had to make reforms to the Venezuelan economy, because we are so broke that all of these programs just stop to exist. You know, people are not going to reject programs because now they are not receiving anything. Actually, these are all, you know, a lot of people say that, hey, Venezuela is going through all of this because of U.S. sanctions, and I would say that's a lie. The major U.S. sanction against the Venezuelan economy arrived in 2017. And because of U.S. sanctions, the government started to lose a lot of money, a lot of economic power. And Maduro and his regime realized that the only way to gain back a little bit of that economic power that they lost was through implementing reforms to the Venezuelan economy. So for example, now we're seeing that Venezuelans are allowed to use the US dollar inside of Venezuela freely. Basically, they can pay a lot of different things in cash using US dollars. He is now apparently trying to even return many of the companies and lands that he confiscated and Hugo Chavez confiscated. He's trying to give them back to their former owners sometimes if they align with the regime, of course, if they are not going to cause him any trouble politically. What else? He's now allowing people to import products from abroad more easily. No price control as hard as it used to be in the past. So minor things like that are making it possible for the Venezuelan economy to recover a little bit. It's nothing extraordinary. You still see the thousands of Venezuelans going away because they cannot have a decent way of living anymore. But at least when you go to a supermarket, you see products. Nobody can buy them, but you see them. It's not like when I left that there was literally nothing to buy because of all of this price control and all of this control of the economy. So in a sense, we could say that Venezuelan economy is transitioning from a hardcore version of socialism to maybe something like the Russian style, which is not capitalist economy, but it is not either like communist like it used to be. It's like every single major enterprise is controlled by the government somehow. They give them to their political allies and friends, or that's what's going on right now in Venezuela.
So a common claim I hear from a lot of socialists on this campus or anywhere else is that it was the U.S. involvement, or that there was U.S. involvement that either heavily contributed or even caused the crisis that we see in Venezuela. And I was wondering if there was any actual grounds to that, or if that's just an excuse for supporting a socialist country like this one.
Well, as I said, I think sanctions even created the incentive for Maduro to improve a bit the economy by, opening up the economy a little bit. So I would say that sanctions even created the opposite effect of what you're saying, right? Of course, if we're going to see major recoveries, we would need to get rid of sanctions. But the thing is, any money that goes into Venezuela is going to be used to fund the military, to fund control of the population. So whenever you start to release sanctions, the main beneficiary of this is going to be the Maduro regime itself. And of course, sanctions are not enough to produce a regime change. I think we all know that. We have seen the Cuban experience. but I don't think that regime change is the main objective of economic sanctions. You are also supposed to try to diminish as much as you can the economic and political power of these regimes, especially because, well, the Cuban regime and also the Venezuelan regime, they are not like locally focused only. They are always trying to expand. They funded a lot of movements across the region. A lot of successful leftist political parties were funded by Hugo Chavez and Maduro, like for example Podemos in Spain, or the PT in Brazil. Now that we're seeing that Lula is apparently coming back, or I mean, they are always trying to influence across the region and across the globe. So I do believe that sanction is a way to also to limit that kind of influence that the Cuban regime and the Venezuelan regime and other kind of regimes like this have over the world. So I do support sanctions. They are not the main reason why Venezuela collapsed. The main, as I said, the first major sanction against the Venezuelan economy happened in 2017 under the Trump administration. Before that, we didn't have almost any sanctions besides like personal sanctions against particular individuals of the regime that has nothing to do with the Venezuelan economy. And all of the devastation happened, as I said, in the year 2014. So, and if you go to Venezuela right now, and if you go to Venezuela in the year 2014, you're going to see a bit of an improvement. So again, sanctions are not the main driver of this economic reality.
So I know that Venezuela used to supply about 10% of U.S. oil. I'm wondering if that still continues, and who is Venezuela aligning themselves with as far as major countries, China and Russia, the United States? Who are they? Well, obviously not the United States, but OPEC seems to be big in their lives. And yeah, they do have huge reserves, I know that.
Yeah, well, of course, our oil production capacity was reduced a bunch during the years of Hugo Chavez and Maduro. First of all, because they collapsed our industry. They either stole all the money, or they used it to fund all of his socialist dream, and they stopped reinvesting in the industry. They stopped doing, maintenance or reparations, and now, well, our oil production capacity is extremely low compared to what we used to produce in the past. Also, I would say U.S. sanctions were harming our ability to produce and sell oil. It's funny because Hugo Chavez was constantly talking horribly about the U.S. and the U.S. government. However, the U.S. economy was our main oil buyer. So, it was really hypocrite. I don't know how to say that, but anyway, now I think the Biden administration is trying to open up a path for Maduro to start selling oil again. I guess because of all of the fighting we're seeing against Russia, they are desperately looking for new oil providers. It's funny because he refuses to produce exploit our own oil capacities, but at the same time he's trying to engage in conversation with Maduro to see what kind of deal can be cut. A lot of sanctions have been already lifted. Chevron is going to resume operations in Venezuela. They are already there, but well, that's the situation. And when it comes to political alliances of the regime, I would say that's the main reason why we have not been able to remove the system and these people out of power, because they have received a lot of support from regimes like the Russian regime or the Chinese or the Iranian people. The Cubans are all involved there big time. Iran even has a lot of terrorist cells operating in Venezuela. They do trainings, they do a lot of money laundering inside of Venezuela to finance their operations in Iran. Actually, many of the uranium that Iran is using for their nuclear program came actually from Venezuela. And again, the Venezuelan regime has received a lot of in military expertise, in intelligence reports, or yeah, that's why we need also U.S. and Western support, because Maduro is receiving so many help from many different nations that hate the United States, and well, if we are ever going to have a fair fight, we are going to need the rest of the world to support us. But that's not happening right now. Right now, as we are speaking, Maduro met with President Macron from France. They shook hands. They, because of the same, they are just trying to get Maduro to sell them oil and gas and stuff like that because of the crisis they created with the Russian invasion in Ukraine. But, so Maduro is at his toughest. Maduro has never been stronger than, politically speaking, than how it is today. So that's sad. And I hope the political environments change in the future, but I don't see that happening anytime nearby.
A classic tactic of authoritarian regimes is to police your speech. How did you and your friends during this time deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually in charge of the training of the student movement of my university. We used to receive a lot of support from like people in expert on technology. For example, they train us to all of this almost underground. Of course, they train us to how to send encrypted messages and encrypted emails, and you know, whenever we were planning something, we did it like as secretly as possible, because we know there were always someone who was infiltrated, who was selling information to the regime. It was almost like a movie, you know. It was actually great. From my point of view, it was kind of exciting. You know, we felt like we were facing something so bigger than us, and it was like that. But then the excitement became a terrible fear. I remember this time in 2014, that was one of my first major protests that I ever attended. There was a guy who was shot down. He was murdered like 2 blocks from where I was standing, and I have never experienced so much fear in my life, because, and the depression that came after that event was horrible, because I knew like, man, that could have been me so easily. I was at the same spot, and I saw what happened. However, we kept going despite the fear, right? But, I don't know, it looks like it was in vain, but yeah, that was a big risk that we were always facing.
My question was sort of related to that, but I was wondering, if the country seems to sort of be rebuilding, do you think it's possible to sort of start not just policing speech with unjust laws and the force, but maybe start doing what the Kims in North Korea do, and like indoctrinate people with the education system to make them maybe honor the government a little bit more than anybody should. What I'm wondering.
Can you rephrase your question to see if I got it correctly?
Is the government going to start brainwashing people is what I'm wondering. Are they going, I don't
They're not
know
going
if you
to start, they're doing it since 99.
I know you can't read their mind, but I was just wondering, do you see that getting to be more and more serious into the future?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it's already pretty serious. Like, you cannot get more serious than what we have right now. For example, in public schools, you're going to see a big image, not like that one, of course, but like you're going to see a painting of Hugo Chavez, and a painting of Jesus Christ, and a painting of Simon Bolivar, which is our, like, I would say like George Washington. I don't know, he drove our main independence movement from Spain. But according to this regime, all of these 3 figures are in the same spot. So as you can, this idolatry of the leader. Of course, now Hugo Chavez is trying to they're trying to replace him with Maduro because he's the current leader, of course. But yeah, in public schools, this is a major issue.
You don't see that big. You don't see this happening in private education, but private education is being diminished with the passage of time because of all of the economic circumstances. But yeah, this indoctrination is big. Political freedom, as nobody is allowed to talk. Just last month we saw how Maduro closed like 30 different radio shows, and there is no free speech to fight back this indoctrination. However, yeah, it's a big problem.
When you went into the 3 months of hiding, how did you know where to go? And did you have any time to pack your belongings? And how did you get there? I mean, without saying where.
Yeah, first there are a lot of things that I can talk about.
Just the process you went through.
Yeah, well, I first when I heard, you know, my friend's mom, she called me like, "Hey, this just happened." At the beginning, we thought like, "Oh, maybe this is not a big deal," because usually when the protests during this time were like massive. We were millions in the streets doing exactly the same. So what they used to do is like they capture someone, they put it in place in prison for, I don't know, 2 or 3 days, and then they release him like, don't do it again. And there were some cases like that. And I thought this was going to be one of those cases, so I left my house, I went to somewhere else. But then a week had passed, another week passed, and there were no news from my friend. Apparently, some bigger member of the regime decided to just let him stay in prison for a longer period of time. Then, of course, I started to receive help from other kind of organizations, and they put me in a place, to hide, and they provided me with a lot of resources. They had like probably people working inside of the regime who was telling information like, yeah, he needs to be put away. And then they also told me like, well, he can now, if he keeps his head low, he's going to be able to walk again. Well, yeah, a lot of things like that. It was maybe I should write a book in the future. I might, and I would release it when it's safe for the people who helped me. But yeah, it was something like that. My friend, when he was released, we were not able to talk to each other for almost 2 months more after, and then he confirmed to me that when he was being interrogated, the police was showing pictures of all of us, and they were telling him like that, telling him to tell them where we were and how to find us. He went through a lot of torture. It was yeah. I see myself right now living in the U.S. and giving presentation, and I cannot believe that how my life was. Like, wow, was that me really? Like, it feels so surreal, but it happened.
How secure were your election processes over the period of this time? And did that influence the outcome? And if so, how?
The elections?
Yeah, being that tomorrow's our election day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, our election system is completely not reliable. I think that's evident. But for a long period of time, Hugo Chavez managed to deceive the public audience and the international press and everybody, and he made people believe that elections in Venezuela were fair and secure. For example, this is something that I don't understand. In the year 2004, there was a major attempt from the Venezuelan society to get rid of Hugo Chavez. We organized like a major election process. There was a single question in the ballot box. It was like, do you want Hugo Chavez to remain in power, yes or no? And the way we to activate this process in Venezuela, we needed to collect like, I would say like 7 million people signatures in order to start this process. and we collected all of the signatures and plus like 1 million more. I mean, if you only count the signatures, Hugo Chavez was lost because we managed to collect so many signatures from so many different people that the numbers didn't back him up. And this is the year when he decided out of nowhere he said, hey, you know what, we're going to modernize our electoral system by putting in place this, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, of course, but this was the year when he decided to modernize the electoral system by putting in place all of these electoral machines and the company that was selected to do this process was Smartmatic. There was no like licitation process. There was no competition among different companies. Hugo Chavez basically forced this company to be the provider of all of this technology. And later, well, now we'll see how Smartmatic is organizing major elections all over the world. They have presence in Africa. They have presence in Brazil. They even have presence here in the United States. So this is something we were discussing, my friends and I don't understand how Smartmatic, having this really dark past, has now so much influence across the globe, not only in Venezuela but in different countries. So, yeah, I mean, definitely. After 2004, at least, Chavez managed to control fairly our electoral system. We were always losing whatever election, like for 1%, 2%. That was always the difference, of course. And of course, I don't trust these people to organize any free and fair election.
Did your friend make it to America?
My family.
And your friend?
My friend. Well, my friend is in Uruguay. Uruguay in South America. So he escaped. When he was released, he was required to go back to court every 8 days to sign something. He was under probation. After a while complaining with this, he managed to escape. He hid in a truck, basically, as I said. And he escaped to Colombia, and now he's living in Uruguay. Actually, he's trying to come here, legally, of course. But yeah, he's right now living in Uruguay, and you didn't ask about my family, but I'm gonna talk about it anyway. Yeah. Majority of them are still in Venezuela. That's probably the saddest part of being here right now. I mean, I love what I'm experiencing. I love all of the opportunities, but I also don't know when I'm going to be able to see my family, if ever, again. My mom managed to come in the evening last year. She stayed for a while, but she needed to return because my grandma is already too old and she needs someone to take care of her. That's my mom. And now my mom doesn't even have a US visa anymore, and there is no US embassy operating in Venezuela anymore. So it is extremely expensive and bureaucratic, the process for any Venezuelan to come here and visit or stay. So yeah, pray to God every day for me to be able to see my family again, especially my grandma. She's already over the 80s. I don't know if she's like my mom to me. She raised me basically because my mom was always working. I spend most of the time with my grandma. I don't know if we're ever going to meet again. I hope so.
We'll take one more question for Jorge.
I came from China, and I know the communist political censorship, the propaganda and media. Chinese government put a firewall, the internet. So the inside China, you can't get access to West media, West website, anything. So is there anything like that in Venezuela?
Oh yeah, of course. A lot of websites are constantly being blocked because they inform society of what's going on. Probably Venezuela don't have the technology to censor even further, like what we're seeing in China right now. But yeah, they are always trying to manipulate media, to block web page or media that are trying to inform Venezuelans. And basically because social media is the main source of information that Venezuelans have left to receive real information, because our local TV and news outlet, they are all somehow controlled by the regime, either because they create so much fear to them that they censor themselves, or because they just confiscate their things and now they are the owners. But yeah, censorship and internet manipulation is big inside of Venezuela.
Even the Chinese, they don't even have the social media. Chinese have their government to control the social media. It's called the WeChat, and everything is censored. So they use the keywords. You can't. There's a millions of keywords. So if you have that, then they deleted it, and so there's a heavy censorship. So mainly the people inside the China can't get accurate information.
Yeah, I don't think Venezuela is in that level yet. I mean, we still have access to Facebook, to Twitter, to Instagram. Well, maybe now we're going to see those companies censoring us. Probably, I don't know. Maduro will receive help, but yeah, we're not in that level yet. Thanks God, and I hope we don't reach that level. But they will be happy to reach that level. Probably it's a matter of having the resources to do that. I don't know. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you again for coming all the way out here. I know this is way up north, really cold.
Yeah.
And thank all of you guys for
Like
coming
Miami.
out and seeing us for our first event in Freedom Week.
Do you have a donation box somewhere?
No.
That would be a Lynn question.
I'll take your money.
It's okay, she's our advisor.
Can we take like a Google picture?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we need a picture of all the YAF gang. So before the YAF gang leaks, we need all you